Okay, folks, if you want to find a seat, if you can find a seat, we're bringing some more chairs in, and we'll get started. Huh? Yeah, if you don't have a place to sit, there are a couple of chairs at tables that are not occupied here and there, and we're bringing some more in, so we'll try and get a seat for everybody. So welcome. We're absolutely delighted to this turnout. Welcome to the kickoff Date with History for 2016. I know you've missed us terribly since our last one in December. We've missed all of you, and we're delighted to see everybody here. My name is Paul Herbert. I'm the director of the 1st Division Museum at Cantigny, and I'd like to welcome you to our first Date with History of the year. So I got a trivia question. What's the biggest battle in American history? Okay, take a guess. Okay, there's a Gettysburg. I heard Argonne over there. Any other nominations for the biggest battle in American history? Meuse-Argonne. Okay. Any others? All right. Well, you're all too smart. Yeah, it's the Meuse-Argonne campaign in October and November 1918, right at the end of World War I. And when you ask that question to a lot of people, they'll say Gettysburg because it's so iconic in our memory, or they'll say Battle of the Bulge, or maybe the Normandy landings, or maybe Iwo Jima, right? There's been a lot of big battles. There's no question about it. But the biggest battle in our history, whether it's measured by duration or the amount of space or the number of troops committed or the number of casualties, was the Meuse-Argonne offensive that brought World War I to an armistice in the fall of 1918. And that's what our speaker is going to speak about in just a couple of minutes. Before he does that, this is really appropriate because this is 2016 and we're less than a year out, or slightly over a year out from the centennial of World War I. The United States declared war in April of 1917. The 1st Division was created, ordered to be created in May of 1917. It was assembled for the first time at Hoboken, New Jersey in June of 1917. And it didn't come home until it was over there. And that was after 9 months of occupation duty in Germany. We've kind of forgotten that we occupied Germany for a while at the end of World War I. So here at Cantigny, we will have a lot of special activities that acknowledge the centennial through 2017, 2018, and 2019. And you'll hear more about that later. Of course, this is the home of Colonel Robert R. McCormick, who lived here at Cantigny. Out of all of his accomplishments as the owner, editor, and publisher of the Chicago Tribune for nearly 50 years, he was proudest in life of his service as a soldier in the 1st Division in World War I. And so I think he would particularly applaud the occasion and the speaker and the topic. He named this estate Cantigny in honor of the first battle, first American battle of World War I, and he left it as a public park for the people of Illinois. And those of you who have joined us from Indiana, Iowa, or Wisconsin are equally welcome as the people of Illinois. And he said, don't forget my beloved 1st Division. So that's why there's a 1st Division Museum at Cantigny Park in Wheaton, which was his home estate for many, many years. And then that's our association, historical association, no longer any other kind of relationship with the Chicago Tribune. So without much further ado, I will talk about our speaker, Peter Belmonte, who is here on my left and will be out here in just a second. He is a retiree from 20 years service in the United States Air Force, where he served both as an enlisted airman and as an officer and navigator. He's a veteran of Operation Desert Storm. He got his bachelor's degree in mathematics from Purdue University, a very outstanding university. And then he woke up and realized where he really ought to concentrate his intellectual energies, and he got his master's degree in history at California State University in Stanislaus. He is particularly interested in the history of immigration, and that interest led him to military history because he discovered that he had a family member who served in the American Expeditionary Forces in World War I. He's written and published on immigration and military history. He's a member of the Company of Military Historians. His first book came out in 2001 and was entitled Italian Americans in World War II. That distant relative that he discovered happened to be a member of the 1st Division. And so that inspired him to write about this particular regiment, the 26th Infantry Regiment, of whom there is at least one veteran, not a World War I veteran, but a Vietnam veteran with us this evening. And so it's a great pleasure to introduce Peter Belmonte to talk about his book, Days of Perfect Hell, October-November 1918, the U.S. 26th Infantry Regiment in the Meuse-Argonne Offensive, which you now know is America's biggest battle. Peter?
Wow, good turnout. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. Not snowing yet, right? So I just thank you very much. Thanks to Paul and the 26th Division, the 1st Division, yeah, I got it. 1st Division Museum here, just wonderful. They've been very hospitable to me. Great research facility, great museum. I really appreciate that. It's an honor for me to be here and give this talk. I want to ask, I know we have one 26th Infantry Regiment veteran. Any other 26th Infantry Regiment? Wave something? No? How about 1st Division? Okay, a bunch of 1st Divisions, a few 1st Divisions. How about veterans in general? Okay, a whole bunch. Thank you very much. Good. All right, Air Force veterans. God bless you. Thank you very much. There's a couple. Thank you. Yeah, I was going to leave. No, I wasn't going to leave. So. Okay, what I'd like to talk about tonight is, well, three main things. First is why I wrote this book. How did it come about? You heard a little bit about that. Secondly, in the process, what sources I found. What's out there on this battle and on the 26th Infantry Regiment. And also what I learned in the process. Okay? First, why I wrote the book. I'm not a professional historian. I have a master's degree in history, but after I retired from the Air Force, I went to work for the government as a civilian, not a historian. I have a master's degree, but what I did with that is I've written, as you know, 2 books, articles, things like that. So it's sort of avocational historian, I guess. And my 2 areas of interest were immigration history and military history. Somewhere along the line, I got the idea that, I'd like to document the immigrants from where my ancestors came from, southern Italy, a little particular area I had in mind. Thousands of them immigrated from the 1870s, 1880s onward. And I thought that would be interesting. So I started gathering information. Most of them settled in Chicago. Many of them settled in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which is about 40 miles north of here on Lake Michigan. That's where my mother's family's from. And I went up there to Wisconsin, to Kenosha, did some research, and I went into the Simmons Public Library there. And the vestibule, it's really kind of neat. It's an old library. The vestibule's dome-shaped almost. It's got these big curved walls. And on there, I walked in and I saw etched in the I don't know if it's marble or granite, but it's beautiful, the names of all the servicemen and women from Kenosha who served in World War I. And I was looking through that. And I looked and I started recognizing these Italian surnames that I knew to be from this village, this area. I said, well, that's interesting. I could get some information on them and incorporate it. So I got my pen and paper and I copied everything down. And it wasn't until later I realized they had a typewritten copy in the library. People were coming in looking at me like, So anyway, I got that and I photocopied that and I found all the men, it was only men, not women from that area. And I started gathering some information. on them. Now, if you're looking for World War I service records, they're burned. They're gone. Most of them are. They were World War I and World War II service records resided in a National Personnel Record Center in St. Louis, near where I'm currently living. Fire, of course, right, in 1973 burned most of them. You may luck out and find some that they're reconstructed. So I couldn't get much from that, but I did get some statement of service cards, and I'll explain that a little bit later. And I saw that three or four of them I knew were my distant relatives. And one man in particular was my grandmother's cousin, just distant relative. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I got some information on him. And I got an award card, and there it is. There's the award card. I don't know if you can see that. Private Antonio Giorno, Company E, 26th Infantry Regiment, 1st Division. Cited in General Order 13, Headquarters, 2nd Infantry Brigade, Camp Taylor, Zachary Taylor, Kentucky, December 31st, 1919. For gallantry in action and devotion to duty during the operations of the 2nd Infantry Brigade in the first phase of the Meuse-Argonne offensive. So this intrigued me. I said, well, I wonder what he did. I would like to know this would be interesting to write in the book. Well, of course, there's not much. This is bare bones. And also, you'll notice that there's no number. If there was supposed to be, okay, there we go. If there's a date typewritten or handwritten there, or a little number up here, this is a serial number, a service number. That would have meant that it was usually awarded, the medal itself would have been awarded to him on that date. So I don't know if he didn't apply for the medal, didn't care, didn't know, whatever. I should go back and tell you, this authorized, if you were cited in a general orders, you were authorized to put a little silver star on the Victory Medal ribbon. And the veterans here know that's almost like a cluster. It's a little silver star, and that is an indication, oh, this man was cited for gallantry or for some action. Then later in the 1930s, early 1930s, they developed the Silver Star Medal, which most of us are familiar with, the third highest award for gallantry. And it enabled the veterans, if they were cited thusly, to apply for and get the medal. So that's kind of the history of that. Apparently he didn't do it, no idea. So I said, you know what, I would like to know what is gallantry in action. That's great, but I want to know what happened. So I said, I'll just start looking at information on the 26th Infantry Regiment and the Meuse-Argonne offensive. And then I'll kind of build a little narrative around that. May not know exactly what he did, but I'll know during these dates, because I didn't know, during these dates what happened. So what did I find? Okay, first, on the left there's a 1st Division history. On the right is it's actually just a kind of a copy of what the cover of the 26th Infantry Regiment history looks like. The 1st Division history is really, really wonderful. It's one of the better unit histories, divisional histories from World War I. They've got a copy in the research library here. I recommend, if you're interested in that, to take a look at it. It's pretty thick. I don't know how many pages. But it's very detailed, very good. Accompanying that, and I don't know if they probably have them here, was a packet of maps. And those maps are fabulous. And I happened to buy a copy that the guy had the maps, so I scarfed those up. And the maps are very essential to follow what happened to the units. According to General Summerall, Charles Summerall, who was the division commander at the time of the first part of this battle, he wrote, in his autobiography, he said he wrote the division history. Captain Barnwell Legg, one of the battalion commanders of in the 26th, in one of his papers wrote that it was a committee of officers who got together and they looked at all the different reports and unit reports and hashed out what actually happened to their particular units, kind of got together and collaborated. Then they got permission to visit all the battlefields so they can check, yeah, that's where we were, that's where my unit was, and that kind of thing. They got together, they revised it, and then later, about 1920, I'm kind of off the top of my head, General Summerall approved it, and it was published. So, I don't know. Anyway, there it is. I don't know who's telling the truth there. Probably a combination of both. The 26th Infantry Regiment history was written by Lieutenant Fullerton, Charles Fullerton, who was the regimental adjutant. That was written in Germany in 1919 when they were in the Army of Occupation. The 28th and 26th and 16th all have similar looking books that were written in Germany. The 18th Infantry Regiment waited until they got back and has a little more substantial book. This is a good unit history. It's got not a lot of detail that I like, but it does have a list of casualties and things like that. So it's a pretty good unit history. That's where I started. That's where I started filling in sort of the skeleton, if you will. Then I would be remiss. There's Major General Charles Summerall, post-war picture. I would be remiss in not mentioning our research center here. Thanks especially to Andrew Woods, who helped me. He sent me scans of photos, unit rosters, very, very helpful. And this is an example of one of the photographs that he sent. But this, and as I found out today, I was much more down there that I could have dug my nails, my fingers into. But this was a great source of help for me for this book. Okay, and if you look at the book, you'll notice it's very topographically heavy. I like maps. I was a navigator, right? I like to see, and to me, I go back when I was a student in high school, and I read a book on the Battle of Fredericksburg, Drama on the Rappahannock, and the maps in there were fabulous. They had the little regiments all lined up and where they were and where they were going. I thought, man, that's great. So I like maps. I like to see visually what happened here. And these are two. I'm kind of going out of order here because the one on the left is from a paper by Major Lyman Frazier, who was a battalion commander. And then years later, these men stayed in the Army and they attended service schools that many of you probably attended, Command and Staff College and Infantry School and things like that. In those schools, they had to write papers. Sometimes they chose to write papers about their experience, in this case, in the Meuse-Argonne offensive. And they included these maps. Again, the one on the left there was from Major Frazier, when his paper, Operations of the 3rd Battalion in the Meuse-Argonne offensive. The one on the right is from Captain Albert B. Helsley, who was an officer in the machine gun company of the 16th Infantry Regiment, which was not directly next to the 26th, but to the west of them. And as you can see, these maps, the 26th, it's probably kind of hard to see here, was in this area. Jump off. This was their lane, and then they shifted and went here. And then this gives that same area. They fought roughly along here, and then up into here, and ended up right up in here at the end. Apologize for the maps not being the greatest there. And then I've got a couple more here. These two were by a man named Rexmond Cochrane, who was an Army historian in the 50s. And he wrote a series of almost books. They're big papers on gas warfare in World War I. And many divisions were covered specifically in the Meuse-Argonne. This one is from, let's see if I remember the 1st Division along the Meuse, 1st to 12 October 1918. And it deals specifically with the gas, the use of gas by the 1st Division and against the 1st Division. So they're pretty thorough. It's almost mind-numbingly gas-centric. But that was his point. That was his purpose. And he's got a lot of good maps. And one good thing about his maps, I did not talk much about the enemy order of battle, but he does. In my book, I don't very much. But he's got that up here. And here you see the lane of the 26th Infantry Regiment coming up. And that's this area right here again. And then shift up to here. So both of those are from him. And I would encourage people to, I'll tell you where you can find these. But they got the 33rd Division, 89th Division, 26th, 29th, all in the Meuse-Argonne, and then some. So he's got some good studies. This is a field message. So somewhere along the line, I became aware of the fact that there's something called Record Group 120 in the National Archives. And that's the records of the AEF, American Expeditionary Forces. So if you want the 1st Division, it's Record Group 120, Box 5, folder, whatever. I don't remember, but it's in the book. I've got it all written down. But I became aware of something called field messages. Well, back then, for the regimental commander to talk to the battalion commander, they didn't pull out their phones. They didn't pull out their cell phones. They didn't pull out their tactical wireless radios. They didn't have those on that level. So they used phones. They used, no kidding, wired. They had NCOs and other enlisted men that would run wire from the regimental commander all along as the battalions advanced. And I learned from Major Frazier, one way that was done is called a ladder. There were 2 wires, I forget how far apart, let's say 20 or 30 feet. And in between these wires, as they went along, there was occasionally connecting wires. So as you can imagine, in a battle, those wires are very susceptible to being severed at the, bombardment, horses, wagons, men tripping, whatever. So they figured if they had these ladders connecting, that there's a better chance that would still go through. So that was one of the main ways that they would telephonically communicate. But wires being what they were often out. So they would have field messages written and given to an enlisted man. They would usually send 2 out, because if one man was killed or wounded, the other man hopefully would get through. Those men were usually had a brassard or some type of stripe for dual reason. One, so that there's a reason why the guy is wandering around. The MPs aren't going to pick him up at regimental headquarters and send him back. He's got a reason. He's delivering a message. The second reason, if he's found lying there, someone would say, hey, this is a runner, which is what they're called, runners. Let's see if he's got a message. I can deliver the message. Very dangerous job, of course, runners. While everybody else is seeking shelter, they're up and about. So here's one. I like this one. This is from Colonel Erickson, who was the commander, Hjalmar Erickson, to the commander of the 3rd Battalion, 5th October. That's the second day after jump-off, 10:40 a.m. 3rd Battalion was then leading. They didn't start leading, but now they've leapfrogged. And it's, do not advance until you get orders from me, Erickson. If you have advanced, dig in. Do not advance until your protective barrage begins. And 10 minutes later, he sent a repeat message. That's how important this is. Nowadays, we take it for granted. Well, of course, I can get a hold of the guy. But this is how important and as I've looked through these field messages, that's what came back to me is Erickson's desire to know exactly what was going on. Make your messages clearer, he'd say. Give me a diagram. What are you doing? What's going on? Do you hear anything from the 1st Battalion? He's craving this info, because he can't be everywhere. He's got to be back directing the 3 battalions. I want to read another one. Apologize, it's going to take me a second here to... This is another one. This is October 11th. Now, this is from Major Frazier, commander of the 3rd Battalion. He's now he's in the lead. He's in the process of taking over the lead from the 2nd Battalion. October 11th, so they went up to the line October 1st. So you got 1st through 11th of fighting, especially 4th through 11th. Terrible fighting, rotten food or no food, cold, drizzly rain, and the pressure of leading men directing an entire battalion. So keep that in mind. And here's I'm going to read the whole message. This is what a message he sent back to Colonel Erickson, the regimental commander. I had K and I companies up here on proper line, explained in detail to officers where they were to go, pointed out direction of line to NCO. The shelling was heavy. I do not understand why the companies went back. I then had my hands full with the situation as regards the 28th, the regiment on his left, and the 361st regiment on his right. Trying to find Ewell, who was the 2nd Battalion commander, trying to find Lieutenant Crosland, 3rd Battalion adjutant, the officer I sent to the 28th as liaison. I gave him a map and full details of where I would be. He has never yet reported. Had to do all running myself. Gave my telephone corporal full details of my new position. Have seen nothing of him since. I am not yet in touch with Ewell. Lieutenant Sackett, commander of Company K, is sick and not responsible, but there is no excuse for Lieutenant Steinmetz commanding Company I. Sorry, Lieutenant Steinmetz. I showed each his position, and then when I looked for them, they were not there. Did not let me know of leaving. Explained it to them that the PC, which is a command post, would be to the left rear of Company M and close to it. So anyway, I just wanted to show you that. That's an example. That's all in a field messages, in one field message. These things weren't supposed to tear my book. Okay, doesn't matter. So that gives you an idea of, one, the importance of this communication, and two, the utter frustration of this officer. He's trying to get things direct. He's trying to tell people what to do, and it's not working. In addition to the field messages, I found, as I said before, these papers that these officers wrote, and there's quite a few of them. The first one I found a reference to a paper by Captain George Cornish. He was the headquarters company commander. The paper is entitled The 26th Infantry Regiment in the Meuse-Argonne Offensive, and it was written for the Command and General Staff School in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas in 1931. I don't remember the reference where I got it from, but I sent away interlibrary loan, and it came back as a microfiche. So my library had a machine, and I photocopied I printed out page after page of this thing. And it's very good. It's got a good description of the attack formation. Other books have that also, but on this also was annotated. He sent questionnaires to the 3 battalion commanders, and they annotated. They sent back sheets that they annotated. Really only one of them, Major Captain or Major Legg, sent back the sheet. I would rather have all 3 of them sent back because it's very helpful. It tells what the formations were each day. You know, B and C company in the lead, D and A company in reserve or in support, something like that. Very helpful for the historian to find out what's going on. After that, I found a reference to a paper, by Captain George Forster. He was the 37 millimeter gun platoon commander for the regiment. And it's called Operations of the 37 millimeter gun platoon, 26th Infantry Regiment, Meuse-Argonne Offensive, Infantry School at Fort Benning, 1931-1932. Well, a 37 millimeter gun, there's 3 of them in a regiment. 1 would normally go with each battalion. It was a smaller, like a mini cannon, and it was called a 1-pounder also, even though the shell was a little more than 1 pound. And very effective weapon. Probably could have used more of them in the regiment. I want to read a quote. Oh wait, but before I do that, so I found this paper, right? And I said, I got to have this. Who else has got a 37 millimeter gun platoon commander's paper? I've got to have it. So I looked and I found on Amazon, I think it was Amazon, one of these pay on demand things or print on demand. I sent away for it. $50 later. There it is. Cheesy print-on-demand cover. George Forster, spelled with a J. And what it is a facsimile of his paper. Okay. You could just kind of, you can't really see that, but it's basically like a photocopy of each page of his paper. So $50 later. And the bad part about this, no sooner had I opened it, sat down and read it, that I found out I could get it online free. So I didn't send it back. I kept it. So if everybody here buys a book, I can recoup my $50. So anyway, such is the craving of a historian. I said, yeah, $50, that's all right. But it's very, very helpful. Let me read a couple quotes from him, from Captain Forster. So he's accompanying the assault wave on the first day. I apologize, this is again like a paragraph, I'm sorry, but this is pretty good. Okay, with his 2nd Battalion now spearheading the 26th assault, Ewell, the battalion commander, came forward with a map to try to pinpoint the German machine gun nests and artillery positions for his own artillery to bombard. Ewell called for the 37 millimeter gun that was now attached to Company E. With a large chew of tobacco in his cheek, Ewell knelt on one knee while placing a map on the other knee. While under heavy machine gun rifle and artillery fire, he directed the shots of the 37 millimeter gunners. Lieutenant Forster, the gun commander, found it difficult to find cover for his gun and crew. They finally crawled out into a shell hole, dragging the trails of their gun and by pulling ropes, and took brush with them for cover. It's another thing, they drag these things. These are heavy guns, these are little cannons. And Forster recommends large men be assigned to the platoon. That leaves me out. The targets, 4 German machine guns, were about 800 yards to the right front. Lieutenant Forster, with his 3 men, crewed the gun. Forster described the action in words that reveal his and the gun crew's excitement and zeal. Quote, I fired the first 3 rounds and was induced to give way to the pleading of the gunner, who got on the target in about 6 rounds and then pumped 2 boxes at them. Now, if you're an infantryman, and we probably have a lot of them here, and you're lying in a shell hole or some little bit of ground that you've dug, and you're down there, and a 37 millimeter gun sets up over there 10 feet away from you and starts firing at the Germans, what are you going to think, Well, that SOB's drawing fire. He's going to draw fire. And lo and behold, that's what happened here. I guess I should read part of that. That's pretty good. As might have been expected, the one-pounder's firing brought down the German retaliation in the form of 77-millimeter artillery fire. The riflemen in the area suffered as the shells exploded on high ground where the 37-millimeter was firing. Lieutenant Forster remembered that one platoon commander lying close to our position kept complaining while we were firing. Then in a little while we would bring down a barrage and get them all killed, and it looked like he was about to be right. So that's a mixed blessing with the really an effective weapon, and probably, as I said, we probably should have had more per regiment. And lastly, not lastly, but probably about the third thing I found was an excellent paper called, it's by Captain Lyman Fraser, and sometimes they'll say Major Captain, because after the war they reverted back to Captain and from Major, so kind of use them maybe interchangeably. I don't mean to be inaccurate. Operations of the 3rd Battalion, 26th Infantry Regiment, 1st Division, in the 2nd and 3rd phases of the Meuse-Argonne offensive. That is a fantastic paper, and it really was very helpful. He was very attentive to detail, and let me show you him. There he is. I did not get this photo from here. I got it online from another source. It's probably his graduation picture. He attended, it's Lyman Fraser. He attended graduate of Williams College in Massachusetts, class of 1914, and he was a 3rd Battalion commander. His paper is excellent. It's very detailed. Sometimes looking at his stuff, it contradicts a little bit with what Lieutenant Forster said, and so it's hard sometimes, and sometimes he even contradicts himself. He had another paper. So you try to blend all this together with the field message. And my thought was the field message was written right there by the guy as the shells were falling. So I'm going to think that that's probably more accurate as far as time and what's going on. And then later, these men were trying their best to remember what happened. But nothing of substance. There's no real big disagreement. But I tried my best, and I put in the book, you'll notice where I put either footnotes or in the text. And I kind of reconciled this, or these two really can't be reconciled. But Fraser's is a very, very good paper. And there, again, my maps. That's a hand-drawn map by him on the back of a field message or sent with a field message. And what it is, I'll read it. You guys, maybe you can't read it. Okay. Position of 3rd Battalion, 26th Infantry at 12 noon, October 10th, 1918. Line in dotted pencil shows approximate position to which battalion is about to proceed. And there you see the line. Let me get this. There. And this is up in the Romaine. When I showed you the other map, it's north in the Romaine forest. Here he's got a corporal and 3 men to establish liaison with the right. That would be the 361st Regiment. Corporal and 2 men left yesterday with engineers. They were the 1st Engineer Regiment was fighting with them and next to them. And you can look in here, they've got guns and things like that. You almost have to see a close-up of that. And here he signed it. 10 October, received at 2:08 in the afternoon. So that's an example. I got a lot of these in there because I find them fascinating and they're very helpful. With these, the grid number there, you see this? This is an intersection. You've got the squares with numbered 34, 35. This lined up with the big map that everybody had. So the regimental commander would get that and he'd be able to line that up and say, okay, that's where they are. And he probably drew it on, or had somebody draw it on his map. All right, another paper was by Captain Legg. This is Captain Barnwell Legg, shown during World War II as a brigadier general, so he stayed in the service. He was the one that was the battalion commander that actually hand wrote some notes on the other man's paper that helped me to understand the formations. His paper was the 1st Division in the Meuse-Argonne offensive, September 26th to October 12th, 1918, the Infantry School, Fort Benning, 1923, excuse me. It's like Marco Rubio. I need a drink of water. Again, his paper is very helpful also. And as you go through with these things, you start feeling like you know these guys. You know, you're reading all these things and reading what they did. It's just fascinating. Let's look at, there's a couple of his drawings, maps, sorry. This one here was when they first came in. Position of the observation posts, 1st Battalion, 26th Infantry, 11 a.m. to October. So they jumped off on 4 October. This is as they first came in to position, 1st of October. 2nd of October, they sent out observation posts. And this is tell you line of resistance, and you can look up your connecting groups with the people on the right. Observation posts up here, these are machine guns. These machine guns are going to fall back, and then this coincides with Montrebat Woods, I think, if I remember correctly. This is a ravine. They were going to advance from here up to here in the first part. Then this is another, and I'll talk about this. They sent a patrol, a 75-man patrol on October 2nd up along there, and it was a disaster. It was a very bad fight, and only about 12 people made it back. Some of them survived out here, wounded. And this, we can read it better over here. The one up there, kind of the right, says they found some wounded men on the patrol. They found wounded men from the other division. Reported German machine gun nests you'll see up there. And these are the ravines. They were going to come up here. This is a ravine. They're going to traverse, go down. It's about a 200-foot drop, if I remember correctly in there. Not a precipitous drop, but it's a drop, and then back up to high ground, and then another ravine which cuts across here. All wooded in the various areas here, and all subject to fire from the woods and from this area here and from the right. They were plagued constantly from the right. To the right was originally the 91st Division, then it was the 32nd Division, and it was back to 91st. So that's the 1st Battalion's. Okay, could not find a military picture of Major Rice Ewell. That's him in VMI, class of 1914. I'll get to the ages of these. They were all young. The battalion commanders were 26 or 27 years old. I'll read a little bit about Major Ewell. He started as the commander of Company E. After jump off on 4 October, the battalion commander for the 2nd Battalion was Captain Wortley, and he was killed very early on, and then Captain Ewell assumed command. He was promoted during the battle to major, but he assumed command. I'm going to read about him. As it turned out, Ewell was a perfect man to lead the 2nd Battalion through the savage fighting of the next 8 days. He had been a star athlete in Virginia Military Institute's class of 1914, and a first captain of its Corps of Cadets. Once, 2nd Lieutenant Charles Ridgely, also of the 26th, came upon Ewell as he was making observation of the enemy positions. That might have been referred to what we talked about earlier when he was trying to get the 37 millimeter to fire. Soon shells started falling all around them, and Ridgely dove for cover in a shell hole. Ewell, however, calmly continued his observations. He has nerves of iron, said Lieutenant Ridgely later. So that's by way of introduction to Major Ewell, Captain/Major Ewell. There's one of his sketches. That's toward the end, and there they are at the top, the north part. That's about as far as they went. That's at the north of Romaine Woods. There you see F Company in the top. E, G, and H are advancing. 2nd Battalion, 13:15, so 1:15 in the afternoon, 10 October. Earlier, he lost track of F Company with E, I think E and G leading. He couldn't find F Company, and there's a bunch of field messages that deal with that. Because that's all wooded. That was Hill 263, all wooded and very craggy and rocky and outcroppings, and not a good place to fight a battle. Okay, another bunch of records I found. National Archives, Record Group 92. That's a burial information file. Office of the Quartermaster General, records. What happened after the war is I'll go back. When there was a casualty, a man killed, as soon as possible, follow-on detail would try to bury him. Usually the regimental chaplain with some assistants would try to gather the men in this area and try to bury them. They would then put one of the dog tags, which they had, on a peg. They'd try to put a peg on there, and they'd carefully note exactly where it was, 20 yards to the right of the tree or whatever. Later, and often they couldn't bury him. They would have to move on. Either a follow-up regiment or a graves registration detail would have to come and bury the men. Same thing, though, they'd get all the information. Later, they were exhumed Everything was checked, and they were sort of moved together to a temporary cemetery, and then finally to these big cemeteries, which are there still today. I forget all the names of them. There's Saint Mihiel Cemetery, Romaine, others, but that's what they did. Now, the War Department, the government, said to the family members, you can have your family member exhumed and sent back to the States if you'd like, or we will keep him here. And they tried to account for everybody, and they did. If you read these, it's amazing the efforts they went, because you can imagine people were vaporized, people were, I don't want to go into detail, but you can imagine. But they try to keep track of everybody. And this man here on the left is Second Lieutenant Thomas Amory, Company D, killed in action October 2nd. So he was the one that led that patrol I was talking to you about, led the patrol forward, 70 men. And it is a good account of his death in the book. There was a man that was on the telephone talking to Major Legg as he was giving kind of a blow-by-blow when the man was killed. And they were trying to get flank a machine gun nest, right? Which is everything was happening. They were trying to flank machine gun nests. And he was killed, sadly. And after the war, they tried to find him. To the right, you'll see a sketch by Sergeant Charles O'Connor, who was on this patrol. So in effort to find where the man was buried, look at the detailed sketch that Sergeant O'Connor provided. Farmhouse, that's the grave right there. That's where the body was found. All these different things. And so they still had hard. His brother, Lieutenant Amory's brother, who was also an officer, actually went to the area to try to find it. They couldn't find it. Finally, late in 1919, some engineers that were working in the area actually found the body, and they've got everything taken care of. But a lot of times they didn't find the body, and I'll get into that a little bit. But I just want to read something about the patrol. Okay, so remember they were ordered to send out these patrols to find out the enemy's situation. Major Legg, who was the battalion commander that ordered the patrol, here's what he said. Only 12 survivors, well, he didn't say this, but only 12 survivors were able to return to the outguards where Lieutenant Meeker delivered his report to Major Legg, who later said, although the cost was great, the patrol had accomplished their mission. Information was now available to lay down the barrage for the initial attack. 13 years later, Captain George Cornish, who commanded the headquarters company of the 26th during this operation, sounded a slightly less positive note when he wrote, this patrol found out what was previously known, that the enemy was in strength in front of the 26th Infantry. So you have two different versions. I would imagine that Captain Cornish would disagree with the idea of sending that patrol out. I want to read also a couple of these letters. When they started corresponding with the families about where their sons or brothers were, they had a lot of very poignant letters. So I wanted to read a couple here. Here's Skilling, Lieutenant Skilling. He was a surgeon, battalion surgeon for the 1st Battalion. This is toward the end of the battle in November. During this action, Skilling saw some wounded men from Company C ahead. Although warned to wait for stretcher bearers, Skilling, with absolute disregard for his personal safety, began to cross an area under German artillery fire to reach the men. The shell fire was so intense that Skilling was forced to take shelter in a shell hole. According to Private Willard Hollett, an enlisted medic, Hollett was one of the men who then had affidavit about the death of Lieutenant Skilling. What did he say? He said, I was about 20 yards from Lieutenant Skilling when he was killed. I saw him hit. He was killed instantly. We were like a pair of brothers. I had to take care of a wounded sergeant. I saw that Lieutenant Skilling was dead. He saw his legs blown in the air. We were in the first wave going over when he was killed. He was identified by his shoes. I also wanted to read a follow-up in the effort to discuss, to find his body, and they corresponded with Lieutenant Skilling's wife. It didn't go very well. Jessie Skilling, the widow of him, she wrote, she was very impatient. Her impatience and anger was vented in an April 3rd, 1919 letter to the Army Adjutant General. Your information has been most cold and cruel, and besides the crushing blow of death, your department causes those left to mourn to die over and over again as a result of your incompetent, unsystematic manner of giving out data to those people who gave and lost their all. So you can imagine, that's... I wanted to read another one. This is another one of the poignant ones. Two brothers named Erickson, not the commander of the regiment. One of them was in the regiment, another one died. One of them was in the regiment, was killed in action. Another one died while in the AEF. Well, here's correspondence back from the Erickson family to the War Department. Here's what the Ericksons wrote. Could it be possible to have the two sons' remains buried side by side in Arlington Cemetery? As our boys was together all their life, in our home and in camp until arriving in France, they were parted and could never locate each other anymore. We would rejoice in our sorrow to know that we could find the remains of our boys resting together in American soil. And they did send the bodies back together, and today they reside side by side in Arlington Cemetery. So that's an example of some of the kind of the poignant things. There's more to that. Excuse me again. Usually don't talk this long. I got 6 kids. I don't do much talking. Okay, another helpful group of records I found was Records Group 117. And this is the American Battle Monuments Commission. After the end of the war, and during the 20s and 30s, they sought to give histories of all the divisions. And they did, and they're great, by the way. If you can get a hold of some of those, they're really good. You can get some of those online, which I'll talk about. And they spared no pains. They spared no effort to correspond with the officers. And they'd send them maps, and they'd say, for example, in this battle, October 5th, we have you as being here. Can you please make an annotation? Is that correct? And they'd make their little blue pencil, and they'd change it, and they'd do that. And if you're lucky, they wrote a nice letter. And these are great letters. They are on usually letterheads to the whatever insurance company or bank that the man worked for. And they would go to varying lengths of description. And I should go all the way back to the beginning to say the 26th Infantry Regiment is blessed in this regard because they got great field messages, better than the other regiments that I found. Great listing of field messages. These letters I'm talking about, also a little better than the other regiments. So I was able to get more information on them, and I'm happy that I was able to do that for this regiment. But there would be a back and forth. They would send the reply, and then they would send back for clarification, and they wouldn't always accept what the officers say, oh, no, we were over here. They would say, well, we don't have corroboration. It's declined. You can even see where they write in the letter, handwritten, no, that's denied because we don't have corroboration and this kind. So there's a little bit of back and forth where they were trying to get it right. And I just want to read a couple of these. These are from the 1920s, these letters. And as I say, they're all pretty good. Okay, here's Lieutenant Calvin Richards, Machine Gun Company commander, recalled the battle as 10 or 11 days of pluperfect hell. I should never forget it. That's where I got this. I changed pluperfect to perfect. I hope that doesn't bother anybody because pluperfect is not right. Sorry, Lieutenant Richards, but I shall never forget it. For some men, the memories were just too painful. In 1928, responding to a question about his experiences as commander of Company L during part of the battle, First Lieutenant John H. Duckett stated that, I doubt if I could have helped much, as this phase of the war all seems like a nightmare to me now. I want to read one more thing about Richards, if I can find it here. This is in around October 9th, and on Hill 269, which I don't have a map of up there anymore, a melee, okay? According to Richards, there were about seven of us, and we killed and wounded about 15 or 20 of the enemy in a hand-to-hand encounter. This was all in the letter that he wrote to the Battle Monuments Commission. Only one other man and myself escaped, the other 5 having been killed. In the wild melee, a German struck Richards in the nose, breaking it, before a sergeant killed him in his tracks. Years later, Richards recalled those 5 machine gunners who fought like wild men, kicking, biting, shooting, and cussing, and who gave their lives in helping hold off this attack and rioting a much greater number than that which opposed them. So that's an example of the thing you can find And then later in the November battles, you find a lot of good letters that people wrote. Well, I could give you one of those. Why not? You guys aren't going anywhere, right? Just me here. 51. This is Second Lieutenant James Clarkson, Company B. This is after the break. They stopped. They went after October 12th. They withdrew for arrest, and they went back in about November 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th. So here they are going back in. The situation in Company B, the 1st Battalion's left support company, was probably typical of the rest of the regiment. Due to losses suffered in the savage fighting in early October, officer manning in the company was critical. Second Lieutenant James A. Clarkson recalled, "I entered the battle when I should have been in the hospital. I was suffering with a severe cold and fever, but as we were overburdened with men and had such a scarcity of officers, and especially since most of our men were replacements, green from the USA, I didn't see how I could very well be evacuated, and so I decided that I'd better stick as long as I could." So two lieutenants led that company. And I hope you get an idea of some of the men, the junior officers. Again, these guys are in their 20s for the most part. And current historiography is rather critical of the leadership, even the junior leaders. But when you hear some of this stuff, I hope you get a little bit different view than maybe you might get from some of the current writings. Okay. Statement of service cards. After the War Department decided that cards like this should be sent to the state adjutant general from the state, for every serviceman from the state from which they entered the service. So wherever they entered, even if they were killed in action, a card like this was going to be made out and sent to that state adjutant. They used the service records to make these cards, and they're varying quality. And some of these you can get online. This is from a platoon leader in Company E who was from Florida. And Florida you can get online. Some you can get on Ancestry. You can get Pennsylvania, New York, and maybe one or two others on Ancestry.com. You can get sort of crummy, cheesy transcript of Missouri's online. But Wisconsin, if you can get Wisconsin, you have to write to the Veterans Museum or email them. I recommend if anybody's researching a Wisconsin World War I veteran, they are very helpful. And Wisconsin has good cards. They have 2 different copies of the cards, 2 different things. They'll give you a little bit different. And they're very good with things like this, with the engagements. They are very thorough with that. And all this stuff, you see, they got the man's name, Second Lieutenant Infantry from November 27, 1917. I'm not sure what that is. Fort Oglethorpe. 61st Infantry to February 28th. And you see he skips all the way to Headquarters Demobilization Center, skipping the 26th Infantry Regiment altogether. So sometimes they make errors in these. Wisconsin's is really good. Illinois, you have to write to the, I was able to call and write to the Adjutant General, some Army NCOs there, and I kind of said, hey, can you help me out? And I didn't want to overburden them with a bunch of requests, so I kind of piecemealed them in there, and then they stopped after a while. But the Illinois ones, I don't know who filled these out. Probably a bunch of clerks, overburdened, typing 4 million of these things. So they're not as good. But this is a good example of a good one. And then, as you can see here, he's wounded October 5th, 1918, Meuse-Argonne, moderate, severe. I'm not sure what that is. Yeah. That's good. So he was gassed. And there you go. Look at here. He was cited in General Orders, 1st Division, so he would have been qualified for a wound stripe, right, which goes on your right sleeve, and later a Purple Heart. And then because he was cited like this, a Silver Star. Whether he applied for any of this, who knows? But it's just a bit of human interest. So these are really good cards. I mean, they're really okay. Online sources that I found. Ancestry.com was very helpful. By the way, that's Private Carmine Ferrito. I'll get to him in a minute. Ancestry.com was very helpful. I believe I established contact with at least one family member through Ancestry.com, but I was able to fill in some birth and death records and things like that. Fold3.com is another one. I'd never used that. Sorry. I never used Fold3. Maybe somebody here has, but it's military. I think it's heavily military records, so that might be something to try. I did not try that. Find a Grave. I know I've heard people talk about that. Findagrave.com. Kind of morbid, right? A bunch of pictures of tombstones. But there's other information in there also. People have put tributes and pictures and things like that. Google Books. Very tricky sometimes to how to do these research parameters for Google Books, and also something called hathightrust.org, which has just any kind of old books that you want on there. I mean, it's great. It's really great, and I was able to get a lot of good information on those. What did I want to say? Oh, all those papers I was talking to you about, those papers written by the officers, I found it at the Combined Arms Research Library, Fort Leavenworth. It's called CARL, C-A-R-L. Fort Leavenworth has, probably not all of them, but a good many of them that you can download as a PDF. And so you can keep them and have them, and it's fine. It's all legal. So, and they also have books and other things. But I recommend anybody want to research really any topic of World War I or World War II or anything, try that. It's Combined Arms Research Library. If you'd look just to put that in there, or CARL, you'll find it. And that's how I found all these things. Could have got this. Could have got that free. No, I'm not bitter. I'm not bitter about that at all. So, but I highly recommend that. I still go through there, and it's a little tricky because sometimes you put in a search parameter and you think, well, of course the one I just found will pop up, and it never comes up again. I'm like, well, where'd it go? I needed it. So you got to fool around with all that stuff. Same thing with like Google Books and Hat High Trust. Military Times Hall of Valor. Those are the citations that I found for Silver Star, Distinguished Service Cross. So I did search for that, and again, parameters. So I put 26th Infantry Regiment, 26th Infantry, whatever, and you eventually can narrow things down. Excuse me. But I enjoyed reading those citations. A lot of them are kind of cookie cutter. Usually they're rescuing wounded men, right? Charging machine gun nests, flanking them, things like that. Excuse me. Newspaper archive. So that's got copies of all these newspapers. There's 2 or 3 different subscriptions that you can do. I did newspaperarchive.com. I think there's other ones. And there again, you're at the mercy of kind of how you're going to research. What parameters are you going to put in there? I put like 26th Infantry Argonne. And you do it from November 1918 to whatever. And sometimes you get something good. I did. I got a few good things. Men talking about how they were wounded and what they did. And sometimes you're just frustrated. You're scrolling through and you just can't find anything. But that's to me when I do other research, I'll go back to that. I stopped my subscription because I really didn't need it anymore. But then I found something called the Veterans History Project in the Library of Congress. And there again, I did some search, and that's where I found Private Carmine Ferrito. Well, he's Italian, so I got to put him in here. And he had a nice little diary that was transcribed. He dictated it to somebody, misspellings and all, and it was really, really helpful, and he had a nice picture of him, too. So those are just examples of some of the things you find online. And here's some men that were killed in action. So in honor of them, and also just by way of illustration, the upper left is Bayard Brown, killed in action in October 7th. And the lower one there is Lieutenant Morgan M. Anderson from Wisconsin, killed in action October 5th. Both of those I was able to get from online from a book called History of Fort Sheridan Officer Training Corps Camps. And so they had, of course, pictures of men that were killed and little bios of the men. And the other man up there, Lieutenant Samuel Golson, he was a machine gun company not commander, he's platoon leader, was killed in action too, sadly. And his picture and story was found in Soldiers of the Great War in Mississippi. So again, an example of some things you could find online. Then I found family members. Now this is Captain Raymond Wortley. There he is on the right as an enlisted man in the National Guard in California. Then later as an officer. He was the one that was killed shortly after jump-off, October 4th. I found his niece or cousin, Janice Brown, and she was kindly allowed me to use these photos. She also sent me a little snippet of some of the letters that were exchanged between a chaplain who was a friend of his when he was killed, sent a letter to his mother. But there you see on his left sleeve there two chevrons. Those are overseas chevrons. So this is taken shortly before his death because every 6 months you're entitled to one of those. So that indicates a year. And he would have been there probably a year. Maybe he was one of the early ones that went over in June or July. So this was taken before his death. He also, on the right sleeve, you see two other chevrons. Those are wound chevrons where you're wounded or gassed. Then you got the chevron. Later you got the Purple Heart medal for that. Just a little bit of info there. That's Captain Wortley. And there's Captain Wortley's, I told you I like maps. See, look at that. So this is when they first came into position. And there's the road into Eccles-Fontaine. 1st Battalion would have been up here somewhere. There he's got Company, I can read it better here. Company F and E in the front, and H and G in support back here. And these are the machine guns. Pointed where they are and where they're pointed. That's Raymond Wortley's picture. Here's another one. And he's got the same thing, but he's got the right 91st Division here. And he says, these people keep changing positions every few hours. So he's kind of frustrated because the Colonel Erickson expects them to know, I want to know where people are. I want to know what liaison you have on your right. Who's to your right? Where are they? Where are you? Where's to your left? And so he's frustrated because they keep changing position. Incidentally, one of them, I think his Major Legg, was been in the 1st Battalion, which would have been up front here, said that the 91st Division was ahead of him. Well, somehow that got into the divisional history from the American Battle Monuments Commission as they were directly in front of them. But that's not. I strenuously disagree with the American Battle Monuments Commission. There was nobody in front of them. They sent a foolhardy, well, not a foolhardy, they sent a patrol out there and got massacred. There was no Americans in front of them at all, but advanced to the right and advanced to them, yes. So yes, they're in front of me, but they're offset. And some of the officers said, no, there was nobody in front of us. And the American Battle Monuments Commission came back and said, no, the other regiment was in front of you because that's what somebody said. And I don't think that ever got corrected, and it bugs me to this day. So I'm here to stick up for the 26th Infantry Regiment. All right, never mind, I get too excited. Okay, then, again, doing a search on the internet, I found this man was Lieutenant William Mansfield of Company E. I've got a soft spot for Company E because that's where my relative was. And maybe that was his platoon leader, I don't know. But he, a nephew of his in England, an Englishman actually, had some things online. It's still online there, and he graciously allowed me to use this picture and some of the quotes from that. But I want to do a couple of quotes from Lieutenant Mansfield because I can. All right. This is a jump off October 4th. Lieutenant Mansfield picked up a discarded steel shovel as he advanced. This he held in front of his face as a shield against which resounded shell fragments, dirt, and rock splinters. The 2nd Battalion halted on a reverse slope of a small hill. The fire at this point was described as withering. Mansfield watched as one tank rumbled over the crest. It lasted 2 minutes. A direct hit by enemy artillery had made it spin around and halt. The 2nd tank got slightly farther before it too was destroyed. Yeah, there's another one from Mansfield here. Okay, the fighting to this point had been severe. As Lieutenant Mansfield recalled, not too many men in Lieutenant M's platoon now. Waiting for the order to start the assault, some of the men of Company E, from their positions on the reverse slope, smoked their cigarettes and would not be present at roll call tomorrow morning. All right, then they go over the top, over the crest, down the slope, running men falling, shells bursting. As they approached the creek at the bottom of Exermont Ravine, there was a bridge crossing the creek. Lieutenant Mansfield immediately ascertained that this enemy-made crossing was certainly zeroed in by multiple machine guns. The lieutenant shouted to his men to avoid the bridge. Half of the 3rd platoon reached the creek and began to reform, still under severe fire from the Germans within 100 yards of them. The men began a heavy return fire. One Company E rifle grenadier at the creek had only 2 rifle grenades left. With these, he made direct hits, and the enemy ceased firing, eased up a bit after these cool, well-directed shots. Then Mansfield led his men into the creek as some of the men from Company F to the right began a bayonet charge. The next thing Mansfield remembered was being on a French hospital train on his way to the rear, the severe bullet wound in his leg, and he received a Silver Star for his bravery. So you stumble onto these things that are great, great. I asked him to send me the whole diary copies, but he never did. Okay, this is the man who wrote the regimental history, Lieutenant Charles B. Fullerton. And this I got at the last minute. I had written the book. It was complete, done. And I found out I got a hold of his granddaughter. And so she sent me the picture, and she sent me the letters that the man wrote. I'm like, okay, well, I got to squeeze this stuff in somewhere. And let me read just a couple of these. Okay, here he is later. The shell fire in the rear areas, that's where Lieutenant Fullerton was, brought danger and some excitement to the regimental headquarters. A 77-millimeter shell landed 4 feet from Lieutenant Charles Fullerton, who was seeking shelter in a hole. Fullerton reported, "My sheepskin coat was literally blown from my back, my field glass case ruined, and gas mask too. Had I not had on all my impedimenta, I should have been wounded in no less than 20 places. I am lucky." Fullerton reported that 2 pieces of shell passed through his glass case, only slightly scratching the field glasses. His canteen was punctured. His musette bag was blown into a bush a few yards away. The only thing untouched was his raincoat that was flat on the ground. Fullerton escaped with a scratch on the back of the wrist and cheek. He lamented that his sheepskin, a treasured garment for some officers, was no longer cozy. That's an example of some of the things. So you can see I got to incorporate that in here somewhere. But I was happy to get that. That was very, very fortunate. This is Lieutenant Captain Shipley Thomas. He was a regimental intelligence officer. Got that from the National Archives. I think they also have that picture here. Okay, who knows who that is? Yeah, that's Theodore Roosevelt and Mrs. right there with his wife. Of course, he died in World War II after winning the Medal of Honor. I want to read something from him. This is in Sedan. I don't know if everybody knows what happened in Sedan. As they were advancing toward the Meuse River, the First Division, the order was get to Sedan as quickly as possible. So the First Division said, "Oh, well, we'll go there. We'll make a left turn. We'll cut across these other 3 or 4 divisions and attack Sedan." Well, that didn't go over with the other divisions, and they got into the knickers of the French also. Well, here's what happened with the French. While all this was going on, the commander of the French 40th Division visited Lieutenant Colonel Roosevelt in his PC. The irate general demanded that the 26th withdraw. He stated that they were advancing in an area his division was preparing to bombard prior to an attack. Lieutenant Colonel Roosevelt replied that he had his orders and he intended to follow them regardless of the presence of the French troops. According to Roosevelt, the general protested a little further, and "I'm afraid I lost my temper." That is about the long and short of it. So that's that little snippet from Roosevelt was what he wrote to one of the guys that were writing the papers. And then I got more quotes about Fullerton and the French, but I'll pass that by. But so there was friction. But I want to read you what General Parker. There he is. He was the commander of the division then. Here's what General Parker said. All right, remember here. Well, I can't find it. Okay. But anyway, he was under the impression that everything was fine. And he said nothing but the warmest feelings of happiness and mutual work existed between us and the French. And I think he's exaggerating that a little bit, because then later he talks about talking to the other division commanders, and they seemed irritated at him. So there you go. And let me sum this up. This is what Major Frazier said. The reasons for the forced march on Sedan are not entirely clear. There were divisions nearer Sedan than the first, like many divisions. However, no participant in that memorable forced march ever regretted that he was present. I doubt that. And the writer prefers to ascribe the reasons to the desire to grant the glory of taking Sedan to a deserving division. The first division was the freshest and strongest division present. So other people wrote, "Yeah, we're happy to let them have it." Nobody who wanted to do that. It was a miserable march. They marched like 70. I better not say that offhand. Between 50 and 70 miles. They were all the First Division troops. They did the longest, and it was a grueling, terrible march. Much of the time under fire. I'd pass. Thank you. Okay. That brings me to what I learned. The youth of many of the commanders kind of surprised me. The regimental commander, Colonel Hjalmar Eriksson, he was born in Norway in 1873, so he was about 45, which is still pretty young to me to be commanding a regiment. And he is a veteran of, he came over and I think, participated in Indian wars and et cetera. So he was an old soldier. He enlisted and then was commissioned. I regret that I don't have a picture of him. I've searched high and low. They don't have it here either. The regiment or the battalion commander is Major Legg, 1st Battalion Commander, 27. Captain Wortley, 2nd Battalion Commander, was 26. Major Rice Ewell replaced Wortley after he was killed, 27, and Major Frazier, 26. And I just can't fathom, to myself back at that age, of leading a battalion of men in this kind of hell is very, to me that was surprising. And I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. I know during World War II there were 20-year-old bomber pilots, so. Another thing that I learned was this, the formation, the battle formation. This does not appear in the book. This is the way I sent it in. And what was published in the book, I'm not entirely happy with. But if you remember this, and then you'll be okay. But that's the battle formation. And you had the first two waves here. There's Company A, Company B, then Company C, Company D. This is the assault companies. And you have the platoons up here. And this is skirmish order. And then about X number of yards behind, I don't know, 25 to 50 or 75, you have the other platoons coming in what's called squad columns. And I had another diagram that I did not bring, but it showed the way the squad columns would then assume, from this formation, assume a skirmish as they moved forward. And then behind you got like 300 yards and you got the support companies. Now this is the support companies of the attack battalion. This is the attack battalion. And they're in squad columns also. And then behind them, you've got the machine gunners, the mortar men, and the cannon men, plus the platoon commander and the staff and things like that. Behind them, about another 500 yards, is the support battalion. So that's the assault battalion. Behind them, in roughly the same formation, would be another battalion, just like that. And then behind them still would be the reserve battalion, which would be either brigade or divisional reserve. But in this case, they were called up fairly early. But I thought that was very interesting. That was called a normal formation. Not all divisions did that. They normally had all 4 regiments in line, each regiment with roughly that. So you picture all 4 regiments like that. The whole front was like 600, 800, even farther, even more yards, the front here. And you can see the great depth. That helped with flank protection and also helped, of course, what would happen in battle is they'd close up and then you'd suffer more casualties. Okay. I also found it was interesting by use of all these things I put together that I could follow this battle almost hour by hour. Not quite, but you could almost just follow. It felt like I'd been through it, but you felt like you were almost watching it. And I thought, and hopefully you get that impression when you read it, just as it goes along. I was shocked, but not surprised at the casualties. Almost about 50% killed and wounded. They started out with roughly 3,000 men, and about, I don't remember offhand, like 1,600 or so casualties, killed and wounded and missing. Also interesting in there is the number of stragglers. Sometimes they would send able-bodied men back to help carry wounded men back. And many of those men never made their way back. Oftentimes, and this happened to Company F, he left the line was under 100 men, well under. And by the time he got back, it picked up another X number of men. And he said many of those were shirkers, but a lot of them were suffering minor wounds. So a lot of the men, you'd go back and you were either overcome by gas or you got lost. You're in the middle of the night in a place. You're terrified as it is. It's easy to get lost. Or you go back and you help bring a wounded man back, and there's coffee. And you say, I've been up there for a while. I'm going to just have a cup of coffee. I'm going to sit down and take it easy or whatever. But they had guys that would round people up and send them back. So there was a lot of that going on. There's some good studies on stragglers in the AEF. And Frazier said that there's a commander, and I'm kind of doing it from memory, a commander can take comfort in the fact there's going to be a certain number of men that can be counted on to start and finish the battle with you. There's a bunch of other guys, they call them shell hole rats, that will drop out and find a place to rest, but there's going to be a certain number that will stick it through. That's human nature. It's been that way forever and more. Okay, to conclude, I'd like to return to why I wrote the book. One of my history professors in grad school told me that just because something happened doesn't mean you should write about it. So we should always ask, so what? That's what he asked to me when he said, what do you want to write about? And I said, well, I'm going to write about this. He goes, so what? I'm like, what do you mean, so what? It's cool, it happened. So he said, no, just because it happened. So that said, I agree with that sentiment, I really do. This book there's not a lot of analysis in here. I have a little bit, but not a lot, because I just wanted to tell the story. And I wanted everybody to see what it was like, to understand what these men went through. And you can kind of pick up on the analysis yourself. I know, as I kind of alluded to this, nowadays the scholarship is to kind of denigrate general Pershing, the AEF, the training in the AEF, the tactics in the AEF, the leaders in the AEF, and as I was talking earlier to the gentleman here, there's enough blame to go around, certainly. Everybody gets kind of put a butter knife and just spread the blame. But oftentimes the things that the AEF got blamed for, they were fighting under British or under French leadership. The French and British were still doing some of the same tactics. I would say the biggest thing was the U.S. not training enough in combined arms operations with the machine guns, with the artillery, with the Stokes mortars, and with the cannon that I was talking about. That's legit. And they found out how to take machine gun nests pretty quickly, straight ahead in a formation. A tight formation like that, probably not a good idea. So they would flank. They would have somebody kind of maintain the front, and they'd flank. And even then, as the flanking party got, they'd find out there's another machine gun nest. So, and the same thing with artillery. We want a lot of artillery preparation. Well, the artillery preparation is great. I would not want to do it without it. But it also churns up the ground over which you're going to be advancing, slowing you down, making your barrage that you're supposed to follow run away from you because I can't pick up the phone and say, hold on, I'm stuck. And so now the other guys will come out of their dugouts. And so there's pros and cons. I think the bottom line is any infantry assault in this war was going to result in terrible casualties if it wanted to succeed, regardless of nation, regardless of whether it's a set piece or whatever it is, because the communications, the technological communication development did not keep pace with the weapons development. Does that make sense? I kind of figured that. But anyway, just to conclude, I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you enjoy the book. And I do give honor to these men, and I hope you will, if you read the book, I hope you will also. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay, Peter, thank you. And we've got time for a couple of questions before we conclude here. JD's got a microphone, and because we're trying to capture this on video, please wait for a mic. Anybody got a question for Peter?
Yep. The first young man back there.
Yeah.
Over
there. Can we have a quick summary of the book, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I start with background of what American Division is. And I go into the history of the 26th. Again, this is kind of a summary. 26th Infantry Regiment from formation all the way to September of 1918. Then I start kind of the daily of what they did. So the chapters are like October 4th with a pithy title, right? Then October 5th. And I lump some of the days together when there wasn't much going on. So that's pretty much how it is, all the way through the end, November, and then post-war has got like one chapter, so they were part of the Army of Occupation. Well, you could write a whole book on the Army of Occupation, which people have, but I kind of summarize that because my goal was that Meuse-Argonne offensive. So that's pretty much what it is: background, Meuse-Argonne offensive, and then just kind of afterward. Okay, welcome, gentleman here. Did you? Oh, and then this other gentleman here. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for coming and presenting and
You're
writing the book. On the maps that you showed, they all seem to have a scale.
Yeah.
And gradated paper. Is that something that they kind of penciled out right there? Was the scale set, and then they kind of did the measurements? And how did they translate what they saw visually onto the map to capture what they were trying to?
Yeah, the base map had that grid on it. So the actual map, and I wish I had it. I have mine framed. I probably could have brought it with the squares numbered. I think that the men probably had a rule and drew those on there and then labeled where they were, and then just without drawing all the topographical features, because all you had to do was look. You drew your positions and things, and then the receiving officer could compare that and then transfer what you've written onto their master map. So they have a master map. This is where Company C is now, and yeah, is that answer? Yeah.
I found onion skins of maps, positions in that, from maps also in that. The question I had: did you find anything else about your relative that got you started on this?
Yeah, no, that was it. Downstairs I found that order that was cited there, which is basically says the same thing. So no, and you know, he's so distantly related, I don't even know who his grandkids are. I don't think he picked up that Silver Star, because I think they could probably apply and get it. I know other people, I've given information to another lady who was able to do that, and she got her grandfather's Silver Star. And he's a 1st Division man also, was severely injured at San Miguel. So I don't even know the grant, you know, so that's so distantly related. But so I don't know. I wish I could get more info, but would have been nice. Anyone else?
Any other questions?
I'm front here.
First off, thank you for your service.
You're welcome. Thank you.
What is your next project, or don't you know yet?
Well, I do know. Funny you should ask. I actually have signed a contract with the same publisher with a co-author to write about immigrant soldiers in the military during World War I. I have a deadline, a real quick deadline, so help. So anybody here, seriously, if you have a family member or know anything like that, immigrant, so they had to be born outside the U.S., come to the U.S. and serve in World War I, didn't have to be in combat. If you have picture, diary, cool information, please see me. I've already been talking to the guys here, and they've given me some help. That's my next thing. But I also want to do, and I actually started this, something just like I've done here with the other regiments, 16th and 18th, and eventually 28th. And I've got all the info, or not all the info, but a lot of the info on those other regiments. So that's going to be after the immigrant book. So thank you for asking. So remember, if anybody has that, talk to me. Yes, ma'am. Oh. Yep. I think there's one there.
This will be our last question.
Yeah.
2 questions.
Yeah.
One, were swords used in World War I?
No.
No.
Nope.
I
Bayonets.
have a sword, you know, and I don't know where it came from.
Presentation, probably, if it was World War I. But they did use bayonets, usually for breaking things open and
presentation.
digging.
Now, what about, was the German mustard gas used in that campaign?
Yes.
Yes.
Mustard gas, phosgene, chlorine, and a variety of other, mostly mustard, which is probably the more dangerous. Gas wasn't necessarily fatal, and oftentimes it wasn't, but mustard gas was the most dangerous, and phosgene and chlorine did bad things to your lungs. Mustard gas burned the skin and the inside, you know. So you had to, if you got treatment, you could survive. But
So after World War I, they didn't use mustard gas.
I think that's correct. I don't know that for sure, but I guess is that
Thank
it?
you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Okay, before you all take off, so a couple of very quick announcements. First of all, we give these programs free of charge, but Cantini Post 556, the American Legion, staffs a table in the back. You saw a Veterans Welcome Center, and we have a red, white, and blue mailbox there where we will gladly accept small donations or loose change, all of which goes to the Midwest Shelter for Homeless Veterans in Wheaton, the Larson House. If you don't know about it, you can pick up literature back there. Over 1,000 honorably discharged veterans will sleep on the streets of Illinois tonight because they have no place to live. And DuPage County does something about that at the Midwest Shelter, and I encourage you to know about it and support it. It's a wonderful institution. Our next event like this will be in April, but not on the first Wednesday like it normally is. It'll be on April 20th, and it'll be the debate team from Wheaton College. They'll be here, and they're going to debate the role of the National Guard, the future role of the National Guard. And this will be the first time that we've been able to promote those debates. We've been doing them for a couple of years now. Actually, it was JD's idea to invite college debate teams to take on topics of contemporary military significance, and I think you'll really enjoy it. And then at the end, you'll get to express your opinions on the issue that the kids debate, and they do a fantastic job. So April 20th. March 13th, which is a week from this coming Sunday, is the Legion Pancake Breakfast here. Please come, $7. It's a great feed, okay? And I think you'll enjoy that. Peter is going to be available afterwards in Birdie's, which is the coffee shop back here. If you picked up a copy of his book and you want it signed, he'll be there to ask further questions or to answer further questions and to sign your book. If you want a book and haven't purchased it, you can purchase it in the gift shop, which is by the main entrance where you came in. I'm sure there's something else I'm supposed to announce, but I can't remember what that is. But I'll bring Peter out one more time. We have a small gift for all of our speakers. And particularly, there's a million things I'd like to say about his talk, but I won't delay you in the least on doing that. But we're delighted to have this important part of the history of the 1st Division so well documented by somebody who is so passionate about it. I looked at those faces of the photographs, and they're almost people that I can remember from high school. We're that close to these soldiers that served us so well 100 years ago. And then the other thing that I think is significant for our times, when we sent our army to France to fight for the United States in World War I, it took a huge number of recently arrived immigrants with strange names and strange customs from different churches all over mostly Europe at the time. And most Americans who were already here were scared to death of them, didn't like them, and didn't want them in our communities. And they fought and they died and they served for the United States, and they earned their place in this country. And immigrants have been doing that in the Army of the United States and in the Big Red One ever since. And I think it's an important thing to remember. So, we have this really cool coin, okay, with which you can buy nothing except the beer for us if we encounter you in the future, and we have ours and you don't have yours. And we're big into anniversaries around here. So this one, remember, this is 2016. It's the 2nd year of the 50th anniversary of the war in Vietnam. And so our logo on the back is a tribute to our Vietnam vets. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Very pleased. Thank you.
Thanks for coming, folks. See you on March 13th.